Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the Safe Water Advisory Group meeting. This is our second meeting of the year. And we have a busy agenda and some guest speakers here from Dover and DES, so thank you all for being here tonight. I think we should start by just going around and doing introductions of everyone who's at the table, and then we can also do who's in the audience. My name is Andrea Amico. I'm a Portsmouth resident and I co-chair the SWAG, and I will pass it this way.
I'm McQuillan, Fire Chief, City Resident.
Katri Hillman, resident.
Hi, Jim Hewitt, city resident.
Vivek Sedmusky, School Board.
Vince Lombardi, City Council.
Rich Tima, member of the SWAG and city resident.
Casey Caceres, Assistant Water Resource Manager for the City of Portsmouth.
And Al Pratt, Water Resource Manager for the city.
Stephanie Secord, Information Officer and driver of the Zoom bus. We hope it's working.
The audience, Brandon.
Brandon Kernan, Administrator of the Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau.
Christine Binger with Redantis here with the Dover team.
I'm John Storr, the Community Services Director for the City of Dover.
I'm Dean Peschel, Project Manager for the Dover Group.
Tim Poltz, City of Dover, Environmental Project Manager.
Thank you all for being here. All right, next slide, please. So we sent out the agenda. Actually, I'm sorry, before we can pull up the agenda, but we do need to approve our minutes from our March meeting, so we could work on that. Do we have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Okay, is everyone in favor of approving the March meeting minutes?
Sorry, who seconded?
Rich.
Thank you.
Anyone opposed to approve?
I was absent.
Not here.
I think it was probably just yes, but okay, I'm not hearing any opposition, so we'll go ahead and approve our minutes for the March 2025 SWAG meeting. And then, yeah, so here's our agenda. We have a pretty busy agenda, but we'll definitely move through it and finish on time as we usually do. We didn't change the agenda, but we just moved a couple things around timing wise, just to accommodate our speakers who traveled to be here tonight. If you want to go to the next slide, please. We just wanted to give a membership update. So as you all know, we do have a representative from the school board who serves on the SWAG. Prior to tonight, it was Liz Barrett, who was a school board member, and Liz has decided to step down. And so we now have a new school board member joining us tonight, Genevieve, and she will be representing the school board on the SWAG. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank Liz for her service on the SWAG and welcome Genevieve to our group. Thank you. And go to the next slide. All right, and with that, we'll turn it over to our first speaker, Brandon from DES. You can certainly join us at the table.
Good evening. So I'm Brandon Kernan. I work for the State of New Hampshire Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. I've been the administrator of the Bureau for about 5 years as of a week or two ago, and with the state for 25 years at this point. Tonight, I'm just going to give some updates on PFAS and cybersecurity. Next slide, please. First, I'll start off with PFAS. I think a lot of you know that New Hampshire was one of the first states to regulate PFAS in drinking water. In 2019, we established state MCLs. They're in the middle column there for 4 compounds. And since then, community water systems and non-community water systems have to sample for it and show that they comply with the MCLs and put in treatment if they don't. In April of this year, the federal government came out with their own MCLs that were more stringent than ours. And then it was April of last year. And then in May of this year, they got revised. And so this is where we stand right now for standards for PFAS. We have enforceable standards for the state MCLs shown as the middle column there. Really PFOA and PFOS being the driver statewide at 12 and 15 parts per trillion. And then by 2031, we will have to enforce the federal MCL of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. Next slide.
I'm sorry, you said 2041?
2031.
31, okay.
That's
6 years.
I still have a chance of being here. The DES. So well, it made a lot of news last month, the federal MCLs, although they were adopted a year ago, April, they were revised last month by EPA. And a lot of the headlines talked about, the new administration of EPA or the new executive branch rolling back forever chemical protections. For New Hampshire, it's not really the end result, except for the delaying the enforcement date from used to be 2029 to 2031. Initially, back in 2024, EPA also had proposed MCLs for Gen X, PFBS, PFNA, and PFHXS, and they pulled those back last month. But the MCL they have put out there for PFOA and PFOS is so low at 4 parts per trillion that just about any source of water that's public water, such as a public water system, that would have exceeded the PFBS, PFNA, PFHXS, or Gen X standard already exceeds for PFOA and PFOS and would have to put treatment in. So it had no net effect. One odd thing EPA did when they came out with this information last month is they started promoting this exemption clause under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, where you can exempt people from having to comply with certain regulations if it's too complex or costly. It's something that's been there for a while, but it's never been used. And so we really don't have an understanding of how impactful that exemption clause would be. I know in our state, we probably just proceed with enforcing the MCL as is and not looking into exemptions. The other thing that was odd is that EPA just put out basically a very brief press release when they came out with their new intention of rolling back some of the MCLs, but keeping them for PFOA, PFOS. They didn't come out with draft rules. And they're saying those will be available by the end of the year. And so we don't know if there'll be other surprises tucked in there or not. They also said, again, we don't have the rules, that all the other aspects of the rules will stay the same. The sampling and public notification due dates of April 2027 will stay the same. But again, we'll have to see the new rules. In our state, we need to make rules that are at least as stringent as the federal rules, and we were on track to do that. And because we need to essentially get delegated from EPA to be able to administer the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. But we've had to hold off on rulemaking because now we don't know what their rules are going to say exactly. But we have draft rules and we'll be ready to talk to stakeholders once we see what the federal rules look like. The last line on the slides, just a point of caution, although EPA just came out with their new intention for the federal MCLs, this is being litigated, the MCLs. And American Water Works Association, American Metropolitan Water Agency, both representing water systems nationally, are suing EPA. And EPA has asked the court to hold off on action for a few months while they, again, consider the new policies that they've put forward relative to litigation. So I don't know if there will be more changes or not. It's been hard. It's hard to keep people updated because you don't know at what point something's certain enough to say, here's what's happening, because it seems to change every week or two. And we, as an agency, we don't want to be emailing 1,000 water systems every week. Now this, now that. So I'm just waiting a little bit before we reach out to water systems with an update. Next slide, please. For New Hampshire, PFAS is an unfathomable problem. The population center of the state, the southern part of New Hampshire, is all contaminated due to 2 air emission sites. Many square miles, our largest water systems, Manchester, Nashua, are contaminated. If you really look at it, you can get to 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people are consuming water that from a source that exceeds the federal MCL. To comply with New Hampshire standards adopted back in 2019, about 100 sources had to put in treatment for public water systems. And for the federal standards, there'll be another 200 additional sources, some of them being very significant sources, very large volume, so costly. So you can easily get to $0.3 billion in additional costs just to comply with the MCL, just for public water systems, which serve about 55% of the state. Next slide. So there are things we're doing to help water systems. There's been a lot of financial assistance the last few years from the federal government for emerging contaminants. And then the state has put forward money, both from ARPA dollars and also the trust fund. We're also litigating, and there's been a class action settlement for PFAS impacts to public water systems that the Department of Justice opted into. And the way it worked nationally is that water systems one by one would put in claims. But in New Hampshire, it's a little different because of litigation with Dover over MTBE a long time ago. It was settled in the courts that the state represents the water systems in any litigation. And so we submitted claims on behalf of all the water systems and people that were eligible under phase one were entities that had detects. And so initially what we had was a few hundred sources out there with the text, but there was some really odd data requirements to the settlements that required that we sample the sources of water in a way that public water systems didn't do so for compliance. So we had to go out to all those sources of water and sample each source using 2 different PFAS analytical methods. And we went and found the lab lowest detection limit, because under the settlement, every detection is eligible for compensation. So when it was all said and done, we put in claims for almost 700 sources of water under phase one. And again, those were ones that were thought to be contaminated. There's a phase two that I'll talk about in a minute. There's a lot of misinformation about this. There's been some news articles on the settlements that say the money is going to the states, not to the water systems, that we jumped in and cut them off. While it's true the payments will be made to the state, there's legislation that's being worked on right now that ensures that money gets routed back to water systems that put money towards mitigating PFAS. And so there'll be a process to either grants for future work or a reimbursement for past work once we receive the funds. But we do not have any payments yet. They should have occurred last year, but it's just been a delay, and it's a national issue, not a New Hampshire issue. And we don't quite know how much we're going to get. A low end estimate was $55 million. I'm optimistic because of how aggressive we were with sampling. It's going to be higher than that. There's $6-7 billion allocated under phase one settlements, and it really depends how many people put claims in, because that gets divided up among the claims. It's based on the capacity of the source, the levels of the PFAS in it, and your historic water use over the last 10 years. All right, next slide, please. We're out working on phase two of the settlement agreement now, which were sources that historically didn't have PFAS detected in them, but we have to again go sample them using that irregular sample methodology, do raw water, not treated like you do for compliance, and using the 2 different EPA methods. And so there's about 1,100 sources that DES staff are sampling now. I'm seeing about half of them with detects, lowering the detection limit to as low as we go. So that's a pretty significant increase over not expecting to find anything. So there'll be claims put in for phase two, and then for those that are non-detect, that establishes the water system baseline condition in case there's contamination in the future. Then they can make a claim, but you have to have that baseline data. Our staff is doing an unbelievable job doing this work. I mean, we're absorbing it. It's a ton of work, and then water systems are really standing up and helping us get access where we need to. And I know it's a lot of burden for them, so we're thankful for that. We are spending about $2 million of our own funds just to get the data to submit these settlement claims. And so it's both personnel and lab costs. It's just quite a bit of work. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So 45% of the states on private wells. My colleagues at DES have sampled over 14,000 private wells since 2016. That's getting in people's basements down to the pressure tank, purging it, and getting a sample. So it's a ton of work. About 57% of the results, again skewed towards the southern part of the state, exceed the federal MCL of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA or PFOS. And so it's a significant problem. And they just keep sampling, and where they find exceedances over the MCL, they expand their sample area, and the more they sample, the more they expand their area. It's the harder you work, the more work you have. It's a very frustrating situation, but plugging away at it like no other state is, certainly for the private wells. We got some federal grants for the next 5-6 years, thanks to some work by Senator Shaheen on tweaking some criteria and existing laws, that we're able to take some money for public water systems and put it towards private wells for the next few years at least. Next slide. So the state does have a private well rebate initiative. If you exceed the federal MCL, you can get a $5,000 rebate to install treatment for PFAS, or $10,000 to connect to a public water supply. And we've had about 1,500 people get rebates for treatment for point of entry. That's where you treat the whole house. About 300 for point of use. It's be dedicated, like at the kitchen sink, and then about 34 people were close enough to a water system, which usually isn't an option, but we're able to, in at least 34 cases, extend to a public water system. Next slide, please. We're doing a lot of work beyond just identifying exposure and eliminating it by having water systems put in treatment or helping private owners address it. We're trying to figure out how to stop the contamination, and the air emissions have been addressed. Firefighting foam, there's been initiatives to address that. But one of the big sources of PFAS is domestic wastewater, decentralized wastewater disposal, and proximity to centralized drinking water supply wells, be it private or public. And so we have a full-time person who has a pool of colleagues she can draw upon to help her out there trying to identify what's causing PFAS to be in domestic wastewater. Because unlike traditional contaminants in wastewater, which usually worry about nitrate, we regulate part per million and nitrate breaks down. PFAS, we regulate it part per trillion and it doesn't break down. So we do see on-site wastewater getting back to water supply wells in some cases, even though you've had no historic problems with septic on-site before. So we're characterizing domestic wastewater and we're finding PFAS in everyone's domestic wastewater. And then we're going one step further and sampling standard consumer products to figure out where it's coming from. And we don't have any final results yet, but some of the partial results are kind of alarming. Tens of thousands of part per trillion of PFAS and some name brand shampoos and stuff like that. And actually they were called the company and they just explained that they didn't know that, and then they went to figure out what was causing it. It was a surfactant they bought from overseas that was in it. So we think we're gonna have a lot of that. And our goal of doing this isn't to do gotcha stuff and embarrass people. We're gonna one by one go to these companies and let them know what we're finding and hopefully work with them to figure out how to green their chemistry and hopefully kind of see the movement where industry will proactively start addressing this. They did something similar to this with 1,4-dioxane, where they on their own got it out. And so I'm hopeful it'll happen with PFAS as they become educated about the problem. Next slide. And this is just an example of why we're worried about domestic wastewater. Those circles there are wellhead protection areas. For the yellow dots, the community water supplies. So all community water supplies have a well protection area. The other yellow dots would be a non-community public water system. The red dots are registered discharges, so something more than a residential septic tank is there. It could be a commercial building or an institution or something, but they have to register with us when it's something other than domestic wastewater. So you can see we have wastewater discharges in close proximity to drinking water sources all over the place, especially in southern New Hampshire where you don't have regional water or sewer. It's all decentralized standalone utilities. All right, next slide, please. So that's what I have for PFAS. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, what are you finding with groundwater? Do you test for groundwater and runoff?
Yes, so like the private well slide there was all private wells, so all groundwater samples, and it would be a mix. It would have been a lot of bedrock wells, but some overburden wells. Then all of our waste sites, we have about 700 active waste sites, most of them pre-PFAS, had to start sampling for PFAS. And I would say 70–80% of those that had no known historic use of PFAS are exceeding our standards for PFAS. So you're definitely finding it everywhere in southern New Hampshire. Pretty much you can get low level detections from the aerial releases. And then there's often another source nearby, a point source that could be a septic system, it could be industry, it could have been a car fire that foam was put on. So you usually have sort of layers of contamination sources. But the southern part of the state, everything's contaminated. Every lake, stream, well, it's just contaminated with PFOA because of the air emissions.
Do most of the people with private wells also have private septic systems? So a potential source from contamination could be from their own septic system discharge.
Yes, and when we test for 20 to 30 analytes. And so we're very familiar with what shows up associated with the air emissions and what doesn't. So oftentimes you can sort of tease out if there's multiple things causing the contamination by other PFAS analytes showing up. We don't, a bunch of them we don't regulate, but we get results for. So they sort of have a fingerprint. So you can kind of see if there's a localized problem that needs more attention separate of the regional air emission issue.
Brendan, when did air emissions cease in New Hampshire?
So for St. Cobain, it was in the last couple of years, it's been demolished at this point, and the site's being constructed. TCI and Amherst, I'd have to get back to you. I think they moved in the late 90s, but I have to get the date for you.
Okay, so it's been, well, 2 years at least for most the major sources, right? So you noticed any downward trend? I'm trying to find some good news.
No, we haven't. And it's really hard when you're at part per trillion levels to track a trend because we're finding even changes in precipitation trends will drive up and down values and stuff. And so we keep going from very wet to very dry. And so we'll see fluctuations there. And then even if sources are sampled multiple times over time, and this is true for all contaminants really, but it's a really big deal at part per trillion. The analytical method, and this catches people off guard, and this is established by EPA, allows for plus or minus 30% accuracy. So you can be negative 30% or positive 30%, and you're meeting the accreditation requirements of EPA. And as you go from lab to lab, you can see some are constantly 20% lower than other ones and stuff. So putting too much faith on that number and trying to plot over time, you have to be very careful. Even the same lab has multiple instruments that can have bias with them too. Again, all meeting accreditation. So we'll get there over time. We'll have trend data, but it's really hard to say 3 is a 5 is different than a 8 sometimes.
Sure. And I mean, I'm familiar, but when you're dealing with parts per trillion, I mean, a lot of people don't hopefully understand how small that is. And in Brandon's career and a bit of mine, I mean, I started off with analytic limits for parts per million. Then 15 years later, it went 1,000 times lower to parts per billion. And now we're another 1,000 times lower at parts per trillion. So it's a phenomenally, I don't even understand how the equipment can read that low. So I can see why the variation is so high.
I mean, results are consistent enough. They're not crazy. I mean, but there is that variation that you just got to be careful of feeling too good about a 2 part per trillion versus a 5 part per trillion. They can be the same number in another lab. The thing about PFAS though is you're right, part per trillion is very, very low, but it shows up in people part per billion when they drink part per trillion water. So you got to worry about it. And EPA is saying safe value is 0 or part per quadrillion, but we can't measure that low. So that's why they picked 4 parts per trillion. They figured that was the achievable reporting limit.
Because that's about as low as the equipment can read.
According to EPA, our labs with litigation are getting down to 0.4 for the detection limit, which isn't the same as reporting limit, but it's valid for submittal under the claims. But EPA felt 4 was the right value. We required 2 initially for our MCL, but we're going down to 0.4 now for the purposes of the settlements, making claims.
With the, it's removed in terms of the it's new, but in the soil, the residual amount of PFAS in the soils from previous ambient air, it's going to last for many, 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 many years in terms of that leaching into the groundwater. They're forever chemicals, so they're not going anywhere except into the groundwater as the years as they leach in.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of different opinions, but I think my children's children are going to have the same problem we have today when you're dealing with this level. It's all soil in New Hampshire is contaminated. We did a statewide study. You're right. It's in the soil, so it's a big problem.
Or like lead, but it's not same problem.
It's not a loaded question that takes too much of your time, but I was just wondering about the process, how you're going about this initiative to test other products like the shampoos, from a state level perspective? Like, are you?
So we picked about 50 products at it. And they're products that there's a consensus among my colleagues that are some more common things that they all see in their own houses and stuff. And so shampoos, laundry detergents, stain removers, sort of list of general domestic things.
Okay, so just kind of at random, just based on common goods and products.
It's something that they felt like you see enough shelf space and you get the sense it has a larger market share and is representative of what's being used. And we start off with 50. We're splitting the samples to 2 different labs. Testing non-water pure products is not, there isn't really approved methods for that. So we have to work with the labs on customizing their analytical methods. So we'll get 2 separate results to see how comparable. I wouldn't be surprised if we get 500 from one and a 5,000 from another, because the matrix and all that is stuff that they're not used to. But we're doing the best we can.
Will that data be publicly available at some point, I would assume?
Yeah, once we have all the data sets in from these 2 labs compiled, ideally, we've engaged industry proactively, positively, hopefully, and then, you know, then release it would be my ideal approach, but we could be pressed to release it sooner.
Yes. And these are companies different than 3M and DuPont? Can you share that, or?
The companies are basic manufacturers of personal care products. And 3M and DuPont really aren't involved with that process.
Oh, they, okay.
What we're finding is these companies really don't know what's in the chemicals they're purchasing for their products. You know, that they're buying a surfactant that works really well, but they don't know the raw materials, and the labeling, especially if it's overseas, isn't complete. So we think it's going to be enlightening for them.
That's interesting. Thank you.
And we're going to work with sort of cleaning trade associations as well, to make them aware of it, and hopefully get time at their conferences and stuff to bring up this issue. I mean, there is a great story already of a major commercial floor cleaner company. I think they've announced their initiative, but they contacted my colleague who's leading this work, Dr. Jen Harfman, saying, hey, we're aware of your work. We want to show you and your colleagues something. And they showed us how they went through their products. And yeah, PFAS was in all of it. It worked great. It was the surfactant that made the chemicals spread on the floor. And they got it out using some sort of silica alternative, all on their own initiative. So.
Okay. That's.
Yeah, Brandon, is the rebate program ongoing? If there's no end to it?
At some point, they'd run out of funding. I think they'd seek more funding if they did so, but it is ongoing. I think there's a bit of a pause in payments with the end of the fiscal year and stuff right now, but the money's there and it's still a funded program. And some of our federal dollars can be diverted to rebates too.
I have a question. Regarding the settlement, I know that the money hasn't come in yet, but you mentioned that systems would be eligible for reimbursement if they've already paid. So I know in the city of Portsmouth, our city council approved money to put treatment on the Greenland well, which is, to the best of my knowledge, there's no like known source that we've identified. So is that something Portsmouth could, once that money is available, apply for reimbursement?
Yes.
Okay, that's really great to know.
Probably won't be enough to cover the whole cost, but.
Yeah, but good to know. And then I know we have 2 other city municipal wells that have been impacted by the Air Force. And I know that there's designs in place, but the Air Force also has a policy that they're only gonna work on 3 times the MCL first. They say the worst first, essentially. So I don't know that there's a strong commitment yet that I don't know what the timeline is. And so if there's a delay in getting the Air Force to implement treatment, is this something the city could use, or where if there's already an identified polluter, would we just continue? My concern is the delay, you know, that we're gonna see a delay. So if I'm just trying to think through that, I guess, or just wondering if that's an option.
I'm glad you brought the scenario up, because we have to build the program from scratch. So that's a scenario we'll need to address. What happens if there's a responsible party, but they aren't prioritizing a source and the water system wants to eliminate exposure? So that's something you know, Amy Russo, probably something I can work with Amy Russo on to cover that scenario.
Okay, I mean, I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope the Air Force does just follow through, but I think as everybody, they're reacting to the evolving changes too and trying to figure everything out, but okay. I think that's it. I think everybody else asked my question, so thank you so much.
the handout for cybersecurity. We don't really need to put the slides up for cyber. I don't think it's basically these handouts. So New Hampshire is very concerned about cybersecurity everywhere right now. And there's a lot of work going on with wastewater and drinking water. As an aside, my commissioner, Bob Scott, was a career military person, the Air Force, and it's kind of a second hat he wears. He leads cybersecurity initiatives for the state of New Hampshire and works in and out of a secure building on all that. And he has obviously, high security clearance, as does one of my colleagues, John McKenna, who works on cybersecurity. So we are very aware of the threats. They both know a lot more than I do, but all I know is he checks in multiple times a week on what we're doing for cybersecurity. The concern being that there's foreign actors out there that do not like us, and they either want to steal our money through ransomware or plant a lot of things in our infrastructure. So if there's a big conflict, like one we're moving soon, a foreign actor can do a lot of damage quickly because they'll have already breached critical infrastructure systems. So going back a couple of years, we started ramping up our cybersecurity efforts with water systems. We've done a ton with physical security since 9/11. I mean, just a completely different place than we used to be for physical security. But cyber hadn't really been addressed until a few years ago. So you'll see from this handout, we've done a number of things. We've worked with a federal agency that oversees cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. It's called CISA. And they've been going to our water systems and providing free assessments, very detailed assessments for water systems, and providing findings on where the deficiencies are. And once the water system had that, we had set a couple $1 million aside to provide grants to water and wastewater utilities up to $50,000 for water, $50,000 for wastewater, or if you have both, $100,000 to address things that were identified under that detailed assessment of your cybersecurity. And so that went pretty well. Ultimately used all the money. Projects are 83% complete. Parallel to that, we've done a lot of outreach and training, and that's listed at the bottom of page 1, the different training events and websites and stuff that are stood up to provide water systems information. And from the experience of doing the assessments and the grant program, we learned that cyber is different than what drinking water is. I have 68 people that work for me, and no one's a cyber expert, even our cybersecurity expert, even our IT people. It's a whole nother science discipline. And so even these systems, when they got assessments and the deficiencies identified, they were hard pressed to figure out, what do we apply for a grant? This is all very complicated. And then when they submit grant applications to us, our drinking water engineers or wastewater engineers, like, I don't know if this is a solution or not. You really need a cybersecurity expert. So we went out and hired a nonprofit. Ultimately, it was through a competitive solicitation. And we've hired the Overwatch Foundation, and we're spending several $1 million to provide cybersecurity in a box where they will go out now and take that assessment for CISA or do their own assessment. And then they will do everything you need to do to upgrade your drinking water, wastewater utility to be safe, cyber safe. So they'll provide the hardware, the software, training for a few years. And so that program's running now where any water, wastewater utility serving over 1,000 people can contact Overwatch and get the service at no cost. And so that's ongoing. What we're worried about is a few years from now, when our funding surge ends from 2021 to 2026, our funding in the drinking water program increased by 700% compared to complete pre-COVID levels. And that was to do with a lot of post-COVID desire to invest in infrastructure, and then also the emerging contaminants. Well, we're getting to the end of that, and right now our budgets go the opposite way, where all drinking water is proposed at $0 pretty much in the proposed budget for 26. So we have the contracts in place and the funding set aside to do this for a couple more years, but we're gonna have to get to a place where there's more federal or state funding put towards it, or our water systems have to invest in it and make it a cost of doing business, cybersecurity. And it's a lot because even these systems that are doing cybersecurity in a box and getting all set up with new software, hardware, training and all that. What we're learning from our cybersecurity experts is you pretty much need to change your hardware and software out every few years, even if we're working just fine, because the new technology is built to be safe from emerging threats, and the older stuff isn't supported or can't be licensed. And so water systems are used to these things working for decades without having their SCADA, their computers and software, but they're gonna have to go and ask for funding for something that's working perfectly fine, just to make sure they have cybersecurity. So we really need to do a lot of education with the water utilities and then their policymakers that vote on their budgets, so they understand there's a cost. There's a chance we could regulate cybersecurity, but how we do that, we have to be sensitive to, because the drinking water people aren't the right people necessarily to do it. And we need to make sure we engage with the utilities at the right level, that we're not taking a field operator and bogging them down with a bunch of cyber stuff that doesn't mean any more to them than it means to the person out there trying to tell them what they have to do. So we have to figure out the right level to do this at. But we're learning and we're about as active as we can be. If you're really interested, I have more of a detailed plan on we had to submit this to the White House last year on what we're doing as a state. And we got a letter back saying pretty much we're leading the nation as far as addressing cyber and water and wastewater utilities. I don't know if you want to talk about what you're doing.
The side of things, yeah, I'll talk about our IT department. In the past, 3 to 4 years, we've advanced greatly in cybersecurity, managing cyber risks. We do things, employees have to, constantly do their cyber awareness training and things like that on a personal level. The IT department is separate from our SCADA and our water wastewater department groups. They run, what's called SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition programs that run all of our water wastewater facilities. And that is physically separate from our IT group, and that's all managed separately. We're fortunate we have a SCADA group. There's 4 guys that's their job is managing all the electronics and controls for our SCADA group for water and wastewater equipment. So we went through that CISA audit review last fall, I think, and we scored fairly high with that. There was a few things that I think he said was about 80% complete at this point, things that were taken care of for security. So we are in good shape. And the other thing that the city is doing in our proposed FY26 budget, based on a recommendation from CISA, we have proposed a full-time cybersecurity analyst to manage the cybersecurity program. So we are fortunate. But like Brandon was saying, it's a continuous thing where, what's next year? What's the new software we need to upgrade? What are the new firewalls we need to install next year? So it's ongoing and costly because we need to keep up with this, unfortunately. But the number of cyber threats that are out there and the number of times that people are trying to get in, it's mind-boggling,
And to piggyback on what Al said at the higher level, as the emergency management coordinator, we've had CISA in, we work with the IT folks and with the SCADA group, trying to make sure that we're buckling down on these things because, right, these things are real and it's a priority, right? And we know that there are bad actors and this is what they're looking to do. So the work continues, and to Al's point, it's going to be ongoing, right? And it's a multi-year commitment to these upgrades and systems and protections in place, and back to even just basic training for employees about leaving devices unattended, password protection, things like that. So.
Who do you see, like you were saying, like you folks are water people and you're having to educate yourself and help with programming and things. Do you eventually see kind of a different agency or a different subgroup within your group who will lead this on? Because this is just gonna continue. It's not, so do you think, I'm just thinking, I don't know, ahead, do you see any changes within DES to?
It's difficult to say. I think there's a lot of initiatives going on statewide with school systems and municipalities, and school systems have really been attacked in New Hampshire in some cases. And I think as a state, they'll figure out where to put this. You know, right now, we're really relying on a lot of assistance from our federal representatives to do these assessments and then the contractor, and we could continue down that approach. But yeah, if there's cuts at the federal level and that position goes away, we've lost all of our expertise essentially. And our contract with Overwatch will go a couple more years, but the funding, I don't see that being available in a few years. So we'll have to figure that out, how to do it. It's something that's very much on our mind. Yeah, if anyone wants the plan that we sent to White House, get happy with that.
I would take one.
Let's leave extras. Yeah, I go later. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Go to the next slide, please. I think we are. Yeah, that's all. Okay, we can welcome our friends from Dover to the table. You want to come on up?
I'll just do a quick introduction. It's not my motto. I'm John Storr, the Community Services Director. So I try to keep in touch with Al Pratt before Brian Getz and Peter Rice just about issues. So Al had asked if we could come down. From a staff level, we have Tim Poles as our Environmental Projects Manager. And while we are both involved, the people you want to hear from are experts. Christine Binger is the consultant we've worked with for multiple years from Verdantis. And Dean Pichelle used to have Tim's position many years ago as a dedicated environmental project manager. And due to Dean's knowledge, we've been lucky to keep him on board on a contract basis as a consultant. So Dean still serves as the project manager for the Toland Road landfill, because the landfill is not just unique for the city, but it's made up of a collaborative of contributing partners. Dover happens to be the biggest chunk, but Dean is essentially the captain of the project for the collaborative group. So I think Christine was gonna, Al had advised maybe 20 minutes to go through quickly and a chance for questions. So I think Christine was gonna kick things off.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you all for being here.
So thanks for having me. My name is Christine Binger, as he introduced. I'm with Verdantis. I'm a geologist, a hydrogeologist is my background. Verdantis used to be called GeoInsight, a previous company, and I've been working with Dean and on the Dover landfill project for about 25 years, like most of my career. So I've been at the landfill a long time and I have a personal history out there. So go ahead and next slide. So last 2 years ago, in March of 2023, we were here at this meeting, and Tim's predecessor, Gretchen Young, gave a presentation, and I was here as well. This is online on your portal. We reviewed at that time just some general history of the landfill. We identified responsible parties. As you just heard, you know, Dover, this city is the biggest contributor. We described what was going on at the time, what the focus areas were. We just gave a bigger overview of what kind of assessment remediation we're doing. It was the initial stages of where we were with Southern Plume, which is what we're going to focus on today. And at the time, EPA had just come out with a 5-year review of the landfill process. So we were laying out kind of what their concerns were. So that's in that other PowerPoint presentation. So today, next slide, please. John gave some introductions, and I'm going to focus on kind of what we're doing for assessment and what our remedial design status is right now. We're working on a remediation plan. And at the end, Dean is going to talk about a conservation easement that is along the northern shore of the Bellamy Reservoir near the landfill. So next slide. Just to orient everyone, the Toland, that's a former Dover municipal landfill, was domestic waste with some industrial waste coming in late in the history. We're situated just to the west of the Cachiko River, which is a predominant hydrogeological feature there, where a lot of drainage is to that catchment area. And then, of course, the Malego Brook was more of a brook, a small brook, until it was dammed and created the Bellamy Reservoir to the south there. And you can see it shaded pink. So next slide, please. And this is just a focus plan, site plan, the landfill in the northern portion of the figure, and just showing the juxtaposition between the Cachiko River to the east and then the Bellamy to the south. And so we do have a flow divide where a lot of the groundwater in the area of the landfill flows towards the Cachiko. I mean, that's the predominant flow pattern. But the very western edges of the landfill, there is a component of flow towards the south, towards the, and that's been a topic of, research over many years. Next slide. So I mentioned we kind of divide things into the main area of the landfill, which we call the source control area. Eastern Plume, again, there's a component of groundwater flow going towards those two bends in the river in the Cachiko, and then there's a component of flow heading towards the Bellamy more on the western side of the landfill. So we often talk about Eastern Plume and Southern Plume. Next slide, please. And here's our Bellamy Reservoir watershed. And the landfill is in the top right corner. There's an arrow pointing to the area. So it's a fraction of the shoreline and a fraction of the larger watershed in the area, just to kind of show the relative size and position of the landfill. Next slide. So, that didn't come out very well. So just the thing here is, let's see, the image on the bottom is the landfill. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that we've been studying this area for a long time. In the 1990s, there's a lot of work done in the area of the blue circle. And that's kind of where we identified some mass south of the landfill. We keep keeping an eye on it. They put a bunch more wells there. And then we came out in 2007, and I was there myself. All the pink dots are lots of work we did to try to delineate the edge of what could potentially be moving south. And at the time, 1,4-dioxane and PFAS weren't really unknown. So we really had no concerns, really. Things were dilute and moving very slowly. After 1,4-dioxane was identified in 2018 and 19, we started moving south and really getting, there was always assessment at the shoreline of the Bellamy since the earliest days and showing no impact, no VOCs, no impact at the shoreline. And of course, emerging contaminants, we were just talking about parts per trillion and these very low levels of concentration that we can now detect. So we were picking some of that up near the shoreline. So we've studied this area for over 30 years and been watching it steadily all along. So next slide, please. So at our work, we have a lot of things going on at the shoreline. We have a set of shallow groundwater monitoring wells, some shallow and deep clusters in that yellow box on that northern part of the Bellamy, showing the landfill there up outlined in orange. And we're also doing actual surface water sampling. We've moved into a phase since March of 2023, where we have 3 small tributaries, and I have another slide that will show that from between the Bellamy and the landfill. So 3 tributaries that drain towards the Bellamy. And we have actually 5 actual surface water locations on the Bellamy itself where we are testing. And then there's 2 background samples, the Malago West, Malago Brook, and then the Bellamy River. And those are off to the west side of that figure. The Malago Brook is on the top left, and then Bellamy. And so those are just, again, we want to know, we're talking a lot about background, and Brendan talked a lot about the, just impacts in southern New Hampshire. So there is a background of PFAS, and we do pick it up in those background samples, and I'll get into that some more. So we've been in an assessment phase for about 2 years, quarterly sampling 4 times a year at the shoreline. And we just did one this year in March, and we just did one this past week in June for Q2. Next slide, please. So this is the shoreline that I'm talking about. So in this figure, you can't see the landfill, it's further to the north. But along that shoreline, you can see the blue triangles out in the water. That's Bellamy Reservoir SW surface water 01, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We've been testing 1, 2, and 3 for many, many years. We've recently added 4 and 5, which are kind of central on that figure in this quarterly monitoring phase. And then you can see, it's hard to just show, but the 3 tributaries is one. On the left side of the figure, the kind of the blue hashed lines are tracing these tributaries that drain. And they're shallow, Tributaries, they're dry most of the year. Yesterday, I was out there yesterday with the crew and they were draining them just barely, but we did get some flow measurements yesterday. We sampled them in March. I anticipate usually when we come out in August, they're bone dry from most of the year. So anyway, so we have a set of we have the tributaries, we have monitoring wells, so we're trying to kind of assessing the connection between the groundwater and the Bellamy. Next slide, please. So for our shoreline monitoring wells, they're typically about 10 to 15 feet deep. They're screened into a shallow sand layer. The whole area is covered by a shallow sand layer that's very hydraulically permissive. Water flows through it readily. It flushes a lot of and dilutes a lot of water out. And then it's as you get down into the deeper layers that there's clay and silts and things move a lot slower in those zones. But as I mentioned, back in 2001, we've been sampling for VOCs, and that's things like chlorinated solvents or gasoline components, things that just any type of volatile, and that's not been detected at the shoreline since 2001. So we have never identified a plume or an impact. And then more recently, again, 1,4-dioxane sampling came in 2019. So we have about 6 years of data. And the data is stable. It's single digit, meaning like 1 part per billion or 2 part per billion, kind of low, but it's steady. And that's kind of the typical concentration of 1,4-dioxane we're seeing there. Next slide, please. So in the tributaries, and the pictures on the right just kind of show the trickle or the smaller, we're not talking about rivers. These are very small tributaries. And I'll show a photograph of the drought conditions in 2024 that really affects how things drain towards the Bellamy. But again, since 2005, no VOCs have been detected in the tributaries. So that's really not the issue. 1,4-dioxane, again, we are detecting that. And most of the time it's non-detect on the outskirts, on the western side and eastern side. So it delineated it to a central plume area. And those will get, 2.1, I think was one of the higher values that we've had. And they're kind of hovering around 0.5 or 0.6. So the trends are stable. And again, since for the past 6 years, as we've been going through this design process to think about what can we do to slow this down or stop it, we've also been assessing that the data and the trends are stable. So nothing is changing rapidly is a good point to make here. Next slide, please. So I just want to show this is in 2024 we had drought conditions and the portion I think you can see our folks out on the boat in there. But the idea here is that the portion of the Bellamy near the landfill, I think at its deepest when it's not a drought is about 10 feet deep. So it's not there's a lot of water flowing through it. It's a big catchment area, but though it's shallow. And this is actually showing some tree stumps from the original flooding of the valley back in the 60s. And we even see rock walls and things like that are still there. And I know in some places you can walk right across. But again, that's in the drought condition. I was there yesterday and everything's full and flush, so full of water. So it's back up. But just to keep that in mind, because that can, seasonal variation can, sometimes you can think it's an increasing trend, or like Brendan made a comment, a point about with PFAS, there's not a lot of difference between 5 and 2, depending on what lab tested it. So you want to see orders of magnitude difference to really see something different. And so drought, sometimes seasonal fluctuations could appear like an increasing trend or decreasing trend, but sometimes it's just seasonally variable. Okay, next slide, please. Let's see, I put this in again just to kind of, to point out the surface water data and reorient everyone. So next slide is the surface water sampling of the Bellamy itself. So we did back in 2006 and 2007, there were a couple samples of the Bellamy itself, no VOCs detected, no alarm, no one was concerned at the time. And then again, so recent sampling at the 5 locations. So we've been sampling since October of 2023 was our first quarterly event. We did 4 events in 2024. And we did one event in March of 2025. So that's what I have the data back from. I don't have the data we just did this week. We have non-detect pretty much for 1,4-dioxane. We do whenever, we have a lot of quality control samples, we'll have duplicates, we'll have blanks in the field just to make sure we're not picking things up. So we did have one duplicate that was measured at 0.32 for 1,4-dioxane. So in general, non-detects, but we got this one hit at one point in time, and it's not been repeated. And 0.32 is the actual drinking water standard. So we're right at if we're detecting it at all, it's right at the standard. So we also are doing PFAS sampling, same frequency, quarterly. And again, depending on along that shoreline, the westernmost side and the easternmost side are non-detect. And it's really a couple of places in the middle where we are seeing PFAS concentrations. The compounds that we're seeing are very similar to those two tributary background samples that we showed, on the Bellamy far to the west. So it's the same suite. We just talked about the MCLs. PFOA and PFOS are the two compounds that we might find at the most frequency in our samples, and also in the background samples. All right, next slide, please. So where we are. So we've been going through a design phase with EPA. They wanted us to do hydraulic modeling, so really setting up a real model of how groundwater flows, what the regimes are in the area, what's flowing east towards the Kachika, what's flowing south, really trying to nail that down as best we can using real data from the site. So we did a model setup in 2022. We ran a calibration model in 2023. In January of 2024, we submitted an actual proposal for a layout of the system. And then we kind of went back and forth in 2024 with comments from the agency and talking and having some technical meetings with them. So we just submitted in March of this year a revised memo, kind of addressing their comments, putting in some more details that they wanted. And then they approved it in May of this year. So we're heading so that was the 30% design that's been approved. So that was kind of our conceptual layout. Where do we think the system will go? And so now we're heading towards a 75% remedial design. So we call it the SP75 PRD. And that's going to be due in September of this year. And again, that will lay out a real engineering design, site plans, grading plans, things like that to really show how we're going to install the system. Next slide, please. So right now, the design of this Southern Plume system is consistent with the already installed landfill groundwater extraction system. So at the toe of the landfill, to try to intercept any water coming out of the landfill, we have an extraction system pumping water. This new Southern Plume system will have 12 locations or 12 stations. Each station has 3 wells. We have multiple levels, shallow, intermediate, and deep. So we're getting that sand layer at the top, but we're also getting the deeper layers as we go down into the clay. There'll be a conveyance system from the Southern Plume area up towards Toland Road. And then water is similarly will head off site for treatment at the POTW. So that's kind of the concept. If you go to the next slide, we have a layout. Again, you can see the landfill the toe of the landfill at the top, Bellamy towards the south. And really you can see how we're putting a line of wells right across that Southern Plume area to intercept it. And we have a couple stations off to the east because we have this divide and flow. Some flow goes east and some goes south, and we want to make sure that's maintained. We want to keep the split. We don't want to pull water towards the Bellamy. So we want to make sure we're keeping the natural flows as static as they can be. So that's why we have two legs of the system. Next slide. So yeah, bigger picture. We're working on the design and the hydraulic modeling. We're getting that 75% submitted this year. if we do any work this year, which we're working on, but we're, you know, more like site clearing and road building and utility work, trying to prepare the areas for construction. So we anticipate that 2026 will be the bigger construction year where we put in the actual extraction wells with a drill rig, build the roads, build a conveyance system. So the goal is to get a lot of this discussion and design done in 2025, so 2026. And again, we anticipate most of our construction season will be July, August, September, because it's wet out there and we're trying to mitigate any impacts to the forested wetland. And we're trying to stay, again, the system is pretty far away from the shoreline of the Bellamy because we don't want to have any impacts to the tributaries that are already drained to the Bellamy. And I believe that's everything. Let's see, is there anything? No, one more. Oh, Dean's gonna talk about the conservation easement. So does anyone have any questions for me at the moment before we move on?
I have a couple, there was a couple acronyms I weren't sure what they were, SPRA,
Southern Plume Remedial Action,
okay, and then POTW.
privately owned treatment work, publicly owned treatment works. It's,
I have, just geographically, how far is the landfill from the shoreline of the Bellamy, like in distance? Like looking on a map, I'm just not sure.
I don't know, top of my head, like 2,000 feet, maybe,
Somewhere around.
something like that.
Okay. And what are the levels of PFAS in the plume, like roughly?
Right, so up at the landfill, they're more concentrated, you know, right at the toe. But the attenuation and, you know, the natural dilution as it moves towards south, like right along the shoreline. Let's see, those MCLs, so you talked about 12, 11, you know, for the 4 major PFAS compounds. I want to say we're in double digit, you know, again, near the landfill, we might be at 100 PPT. And then midway, maybe 10 PPT, and then at the water line, more like 1 PPT. So it's kind of really drops off from the landfill to the Bellamy. And I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers in my head.
No, that's okay.
But all the data is available on One Stop for DES.
Okay. And the plan for this remedial action that you're putting in is to stop the plume from moving?
Pretty much. I mean, with groundwater extraction, you're putting in an interference. You're extracting water to minimize the flow south. I mean, you can't stop every molecule because you can't dry it up, but you're creating a hydraulic drain essentially, to at least in a very focused area. So then cleaner water from outside the plume will be pulled towards the center. So the idea is you pull towards the center, pull your impacts out, and then cleaner water will come in from the sides. And then eventually you'll get a difference between what's up gradient to the system and what's down gradient to the system. The area down gradient should slowly start to shift in a decreasing trend.
Okay. And then once you pull the water out, what do you do with it? Like, where does it go?
Yeah, so that's where it'll get pumped up towards Toland Road. And there's an offsite conveyance line from the landfill to the public sewer.
So there's no treatment of the water. And I think we talked about that last time. So it's getting pulled out and it's getting moved. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my last question was, so with the EPA MCLs from last year, but then the changes this year, has any of those affected the work that you all are doing?
Not really.
Okay.
You know, we're still marching forward because our 1,4-dioxane is the driver. It is a constituent of concern on the record for the landfill. Whereas PFAS compounds are not officially a constituent of concern under Superfund, but they're certainly a concern for DES, and we try to comply with both. So the system's meant to treat both, and so we're still marching forward with that treatment regardless of what MCLs are.
Okay.
That will just affect how we measure our progress.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Question, so in dealing with the situation out at Pease on a different board, we encountered that the Air Force had some issues where they didn't plan for certain metals in the hard water in the region, and it fouled their system, and their systems were down more than they were online. Can I presume that you guys know what's gonna be in the water before you
We know because we've been pumping there now
Sure.
since 2012. I mean, there's so much iron in the water again, so it's a constituent of non-concern being iron, but it clogs everything. It
Valves, yeah.
precipitates. And so we have different pumping schemes and pumping methods to eliminate, minimize the impact of iron on our pumping wells. The wells themselves are pretty clear because of the way we pump them. And we're always cleaning our conveyance lines. I mean, multiple times a year because they just cake up with iron. And that's really has anything to do with it's the natural groundwater regime. It's worsened by landfill geochemistry, but the iron is there naturally.
Thank you.
Is the city of Dover paying for the project or are there other funding sources involved?
There's that PRP group with multiple, so the group has about 65% or so. And so they pay that portion of it. So these other entities in the PRP group, the potential responsible parties group.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you go to that talk from like 2 years ago from March, there's an actual list of the PRPs and a percentage for each one. So you
Okay,
can kind of look up who's part of that group.
great. I was just curious about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have one final question.
Yep.
So at Pease, we have a RAB with the Air Force, and I know that's a bit different. Do you have a group where it's, regulators, yourself, residents of the community, maybe like city employees that meet routinely to discuss this? Or is it a little bit, I know the situation at Pease is different. I'm just curious in terms of community engagement and how like the local community is following this topic and engaging. Is there a formal mechanism for that, or is it more just, last time there was a 5-year review and it got presented at the city council and that's how people were informed? But is there other ways that?
I mean, it's all the data is available publicly, so anyone could go and check it out. There used to be a technical assistance grant, tag group grant, I believe, and there was a local presence in Dover. And I remember meetings with citizens showing up and asking questions. But that EPA has not continued that, or I don't think there is.
No, Andrea, I thought I'd try to address it.
Yeah.
Through community services is public works, and I'm kind of envious that you have this swag group because you're talking in detail. I always enjoy being in a room with Brandon Kernan because I leave smarter after the meeting than I was going in. But in Dover, we have focus groups like on solid waste, transportation, but nothing really environmentally. So the city manager will periodically schedule a workshop specific to a water topic. And where, to the point about the funding, we've had to transfer some money in anticipation of the extraction well system. So I should have bulleted out how many times we'll do a specialized workshop. Dover unfortunately had PFAS contamination in drinking water supply. So I did a session on that, but we try to brief the council. I don't think it's as frequently as every year, but like every 18 months, 24 months, something like that. But we do not have a structure that is as detailed as you folks. And the fact that the extraction wells have gone in, we have an overlay zone where people can't have private wells out there, and we provided public water to them. The residents seem to resign that it's there, and I think it's been sort of status quo, that there hasn't really been public impacts. And I think it might be a good time for Dean on the conservation piece. The area is highly recreated. They get a lot of hunting and fishing and people walking out there. So I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, any questions more for me? I'm gonna hand it over to Dean.
Great.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Over this way, front of the map. Over the years, the city of Dover has acquired a number of parcels, some prior to the landfill, and a number of them since we've been dealing with the remediation of the landfill. It's interesting that the landfill opened in 1960, which is about the same time the reservoir was built. But at any rate, what I've come to talk to you about is something that's actually probably good to hear. The city owns about 250 acres around the landfill. This portion here is quite a significant section of shoreline. And
what we've been doing over the last few months, we've been talking with US Fish and Wildlife and the Southeast Land Trust about establishing a conservation easement over the majority of the land that you're looking at here. The landfill, which basically is this area here, won't be part of that easement. But the intention now is to just include everything on this side of Toland Road that's in that yellow minus the landfill area. And then there's even some on the other side of Toland Road at the top of the plan there that will also be included. So as John mentioned, this area is still essentially all wooded. Hunted quite heavily in the fall. People have traditionally used this land for hunting and access to the Bellamy for fishing, so. And I know that people at the city are interested in developing formal walking trails to make it rather nice area. So I just wanted to take a moment to share that with you, that not only are we working on the southern plume remediation system, but this conservation will be a long-term protection for the reservoir, as well as a community benefit for recreation. So, you had any questions?
Is the easement in place right now, or it's something
Yeah.
that's so?
It takes some time because we have to allow for the remediation system, so there's a lot of basically legalese that we have to work out to satisfy the land trust as well as our folks in the city.
Do you anticipate any concerns with it not going through though?
No, we're fully committed to doing it. Actually, the city has talked about doing this for probably 15 years. But now it's sort of with these new acquisitions, these two parcels here are relatively new acquisitions. So it's sort of a driving force of now's the time to do it.
It's great.
Would Dover hold the easement, or do you have a land trust that would be?
It's the Southeast process is not open, I guess. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any final questions for our guest speakers?
Yes, I just have one, this has been a Superfund site about 4 years, is that right?
Been a Superfund site since 1993.
Oh, okay.
When
30
Superfund came into being.
So do you foresee this as being the last active remediation that you'll do here? Because a lot of sites get delisted after time, right? I mean, the remedy works and they, so do you see an end to this?
I would be foolish to say I see an end. I mean, I would like to see an end. I think we're all working very hard to make this, but you know, we didn't foresee 1,4-dioxane and PFAS to come into reality, which really reopened this whole southern plume thing. That when it was just the VOCs that were very stable, and it didn't look like we were gonna have to do anything. And then PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, now we're out here. If something else comes along, who knows? I hope not, but
No, I can, goalposts always moving then.
yes, they are.
So,
That's the nature of this.
I would offer up, it's kind of I think there was a parallel, like our drinking water supply. Dover celebrated like Portsmouth, the 400th anniversary. And we made the decision with the support of DES to put treatment in on a high yield aquifer because we believe there was a finite amount of contamination we'd ultimately extract, remove, and we're using carbon for an absorption process. I have to believe that there's a finite life to the contamination out there. So if we're extracting it, hopefully you're gonna get to a point sometime down the road, long after we're all gone, but it is gonna go, so. And then hopefully that'll be a legacy thing that site, I don't know if it'll ever be clean. But I get frustrated, I'm late to the game as Christine and Dean have been here. And I'm just like, well, what can we do with that parcel? Can we put solar out there? Like EPA says, no, we're not sure if we're gonna make you cap it. What we're gonna do for extraction, what's gonna happen for treatment? And when we were looking at the slides for the presentation where it's a Superfund site, EPA still calls the shots. So we're really not that we're being dictated to by them, but they set the expectations. And then we have to provide the designs to meet what they're looking for.
No, that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. We really appreciate you coming out tonight for all the information and all your work that you're doing. We do have more items on our agenda. You're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to go because I recognize it's the evening. So,
Thank you for
Yeah.
having us.
yeah, thank you so much for making the trip. I think we can move into the next slide. We'll turn it over to Al.
All right, so just is the standard water supply update items that we talk about every time, but I'll go through them. I thought this was interesting when I looked at the drought monitor, how dry it is out west, and especially in the southwest, and we certainly should be grateful that right now here in the northeast, we are in good shape and we have no drought. So this changed probably last September, October. Things started shifting. Rains came in late November, December to really help us out here. As you see here, this is the precipitation over the past year. Really April, May, we got really hit with a lot of rain here. Some of the rain in December really helped started shifting things and got us out of the drought by the spring. As you see here, here's a long term going back to 1998. This is the chart that Brian Getz started when he started working, moving to New Hampshire, I guess, way back when. And see the periods of drought and periods of flood in the 2006 range. And we got pretty low this past year, 2025. Thankfully, we're starting to rebound, and I think June we're doing okay average, so we're hopefully that this will continue. We affected the Bellamy. As you see, the drought last fall through the winter, there was concerns through the winter that if we didn't start getting rain, we'd be in tough shape for the summer. Thankfully, we did get the rain, and the reservoir rebounded. I think this is end of November, December. We refilled the reservoir, and things have been high since. Typically, it's hard to say typically now because every year is very different with the rain, but I used to say typically around July 1st, early July is when water would stop flowing over the dam. And that's what we saw previous years, but that has changed recently. Right now, there's plenty of water still flowing over the dam, and we are set up well for summer. I shouldn't say that either, because that can change quickly. Stream flow, follow that too from back in February, March rains. Stream flow, this is from the Oyster River that we use as sort of a comparison to the Bellamy. Stream flows, because this has a long-term statistic data that we can compare it to. The green is sort of your normal range of stream flow. So we have been in that normal range and sometimes extreme flow in some of the spring rains that we've had. So that's what we also have seen at the Bellamy, flow into the Bellamy. And this reflects also groundwater levels. So this goes back to 2012, and you see the seasonal changes in the groundwater at 4 of the main aquifers for our supply wells that we track. And you see specifically this past spring with the rains, all of the groundwaters have rebounded quite nicely. We're back in good shape and actually above normal in some of our aquifers and normal in some of the other ones. Water production over this past year has been near average. The blue here on the left columns are the 10-year average, which is this past year, where we've had last summer slightly higher demands. It was a drier, hotter summer last year than on average. And it's dropped off. May demands have not been that great because it's been very rainy, so irrigation systems haven't turned on. Typically our highest demands happen in early June, and we just haven't seen that yet. We're still on sort of the moderate low demand period here. Good for us. And here's your, going back to 2004, the annual production. And as you see back in 2004, we've kind of dipped down. We had this drop in overall consumption from 2015 or so. Then in the past 4 or 5 years, we've kind of varied with seasonality changes. And like I said, 2024, drier summer than 2023, which is wet summer, a little higher use for irrigations and such. And the colors on here are split up by each of our sources, so we can see where we're pulling water from. The biggest one on the bottom, obviously, is our surface water, where we have been pulling less of our surface water over the past years. We managed that sort of seasonally. Since the drought was occurring over this past winter, we tried to maximize our use from the surface water and let our groundwater rest and recharge. And I think we've seen that with the rain that we've gotten. It's been successful at recharging the aquifers. And we're still in that mode of resting our wells as much as we can, saving that for a summertime period where our surface water may not be of the best quality. We can then shift our sources of supply over the summer. Here's just another way of looking at sort of that supply contribution. This is just from the first quarter of 2025, the January, February, March period. Just showing we've been pulling over 72% of our water from our surface water facility. And Pease Tradeport, our withdrawals from those 3 wells is just about equal. From that. This is a graphic that I'm starting to put together to kind of display our overall water capacity, and when we talk about capacity, we can look at it in terms of a source's sustainable yield, basically that average water withdrawal from a source given average climatic conditions, your typical rain and how much over time you'd be able to draw from that source. And we look at it in terms of our maximum yield from that source. That's sort of how much can we pull out of that well without drying up that well using that physical pump that's in that well. In an emergency, how much water could we supply? So the 2 columns on the left are Portsmouth supplies. The one on the far left is the sustainable. So looking at 12-month period, how do we look based on what we have pulled out of the ground, out of our sources, versus how much we have left? In this case, for we have the way this is for just May, looking at the May data. We have about 25% of our capacity based on sustainable look at that. And looking at our physically how much water we could get out of the ground, how much water we could pump through our treatment facility, we have about 45% capacity remaining based on that May level. And then Pease, similarly looking at those sources and seeing how much we would be able to withdraw based on meeting demands. The residual capacity and sustainable for Portsmouth may be a little hard to look at because there is a variability in how much water we could get out of the reservoir depending on the time of the year. So that sort of does vary. But anyway, so I attempt to kind of to display where our general capacity is at relative to our demands. Here's our latest quarter, based on our latest quarter data, this 12-month rolling average of our PFAS levels and all of our sources up through March 2025 data. Similar, no real changes here. Like Brandon said, the PFOA and PFAS are the real drivers for treatment on these wells. For being the EPA limit, we're just above that, the Greenland well and Collins well. Portsmouth well has slightly higher levels as it has for many years now, and these have been very consistent numbers. And I will update this table because no longer is there a hazard index in the EPA rule, so we will not be looking at the PFBS or the Gen X as part of that. So these 2 components will no longer be part of the compliance. We still sample for it, we still look at the data, but it's not a driver for us for compliance. I just want to put this on here for ongoing projects. A couple of meetings ago, I listed many pages of all the projects we were working on. I just wanted to highlight some of the top ones now. Storage tank painting is sort of first on my list. We have funds dedicated for painting our storage tanks. These are major assets that are all in need of some repair and resurfacing. If all goes well with preparing the bids, getting out to bid. I'm hoping that we can paint the Spinney storage tank this fall. I just heard today that painting companies look far out, so it might not even happen this fall. We might have to schedule for next spring, depending on how the bids come in and see who's available to do the painting. So we are getting ahead on that, but it's the Spinney Road tank will be the first, and the Newington Booster repairs and recoding, and then finally the Lafayette Road tank. And the problem with painting tanks is they have to be done on certain times of year. They can't be done in the summertime when you have high demands, because we need as much water in storage as possible during that period. And it's a lot more expensive to paint the tank in the wintertime. So we have these windows of time in the fall and spring to do this work. So of the 3 tanks that we're looking at resurfacing, it'll be a fall, spring, fall type of thing. So a year and a half or 2 years we're looking at. Major assets, and they all need some work, and thankfully we do have the funds prepared for this scope of work. Greenland Well is the next, and we did submit an SRF application to the state for funding for that. So we are in the queue if the funding becomes available for that at any time. We're trying to get that. We do have funding through our capital projects money to be able to move ahead with that. We are moving ahead with the final design on that right now. Again, we plan on final design occurring this year, hopefully bidding by next summer or fall, for construction late, that would be late 2026 through 2027. A lot of water main replacement projects that are coming up. We do have money in our CIP for ongoing water main replacements, as we have aging infrastructure, and they seem to be becoming more and more of an issue to repair and replace water mains. Little Bay Road water main is out in Newington, and we have made good progress on that. That project will be done by the end of July. So that's moving ahead. Little Bay transmission main project. I know we put a CIP request in for FY27 for funds for that for 12 million. We recently got an update on the cost for that at a little over 14 million. The cost keeps going up for that project. And this is for a replacement main that goes under the Little Bay, where 70–80% of our water from Madbury comes into Portsmouth. So it's critical infrastructure. Someday we will need to put this main in. It's a matter of how we pay for that. So again, we put an SRF application in for that, just to get in the queue if there's any funding. We want to have a little time to try to manage if there are funding opportunities to help us with that project, because it is such a costly project. Number of other things, hydraulic model update. The bulk of that has been completed. There are some certain areas of town that we want to do some more studies on modeling and helping us just determine some of our pipe replacement and asset management work for that. Smith Well maintenance is ongoing. We have some parts coming in for repairing and cleaning that well. That work will probably be done in the fall at this point, because we are anticipating demands to increase any day now for summer demands. Collins Well 2 permitting is ongoing. That upgrade to that well will be in line with when we put the treatment on for Collins and Portsmouth. And we are still pushing for funds from the Air Force for the Collins and Portsmouth well treatment. I have been told by the Air Force there is a project set up in their system. It's just a matter of them getting the money to put into it. So we just need to keep pushing them to do that, if we can get into the FY26 budget, or if we have to keep pushing to get money elsewhere for that from them. Service line inventory, service line replacement plan. This is part of the EPA rule for the lead copper revisions. We are moving ahead with that in, I think, next week. Governor and Council should be reviewing our request for the $3.5 million in loan for the replacement plan and to continue with our inventory. So once that's in place, we will have able to move ahead with our planning on completing those projects. And the Seacoast Reliability Project and interconnection study is ongoing. One of the highlights from that will be potentially an interconnection between our facility in Madbury, our surface water treatment facility there, and Dover, and making that connection as an emergency supply to Dover there. I believe is all I have. Any questions about water supply status updates? Anything?
I have a question on the timing on the Greenland well. So the design is final, but now the treatment.
We're moving to the final design right now.
Okay, so is there a timeline as to when the treatment would be on, or when it would be?
2027. It's the early 27 is the hope.
And in terms of the Portsmouth well and the Collins well with the Air Force, I know the designs have been submitted to them.
The preliminary design and the request for funds for the final design has been submitted to them.
Okay,
And if we can just get, and that's about $600,000 for the design. So if we can just get those funds, it's a little easier blow to be able to get those monies, we can then proceed, because the concern is we're gonna back up against the EPA's limit.
the 2031, the one that got pushed out, yeah. And then the cost too, I mean, hopefully they'll pay for it, but it's gonna get more expensive, I think, the longer things go, because other water systems are gonna be, okay. All right, I just had a question too about the capacity slide that you put up. I thought that was really great.
Yeah.
Do you, is that, if you wouldn't mind just explaining, like, I understand the numbers, but are you happy with those numbers? In terms of capacity, are we in a good place with that, or is that, like, how does that compare to other water systems?
The question about other water systems, I don't think other water systems look at it to
Okay.
that level of detail.
Okay.
I'm happy with that because especially, just looking at all except for the sustainable Portsmouth system, because I know those numbers aren't quite correct, because the surface water treatment facility sustainable yield is based on a 2.5 million gallon a day sustainable. That's what can be taken out. But I know there are times a year that a lot more than that can be taken out. So that's sort of a questionable number, and it really depends on the year, so I'm comfortable with the numbers as they are now. Yeah.
Okay, so from a capacity perspective, we're in a very good place. That's how.
Especially looking at our demands over the years, and we're been fairly leveled out or dropped down over the years.
The other question I had was around, at our last SWAG, we had signed a letter of support for congressional directed funds. Do you have any updates on that project?
One thing, we finalized the easements. We now have the easement and protection of the Fernal property. It's fantastic. We received the funds from the State Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund. We received the $739,000 from that fund that came in. We received the $25,000 grant fund from the DES Local Source Water Protection Program. And we're waiting for the CDS. We've submitted all of our application materials now. And now it's through EPA review. It's got to go through the DOJ review and that process. And last we talked to the EPA representative on that, she thought by the fall we would, and she was going to keep us informed of where in the process it was. But at least our part is completely done. We've submitted everything that they need.
Okay, and the easement is all
The
done?
easement's done.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's now more just waiting for reimbursement from those congressional funds? Okay, and everything looks like it's gonna go through, but it's just, you have to wait, yeah.
Trust, right?
Okay.
Yep.
That's great. Maybe too, it was great to hear Dover is working on easements too for their area. So you may not know off the top of your head, but how much land around the Bellamy Reservoir now is protected? Like, could you say from a percentage, like, or maybe that's something we could talk about at a future slide?
Yeah, I can bring that up next time. I haven't done
But a
that
good
to
amount,
see. A
do
good
you
amount, a good
think?
amount. There are some areas in the sort of the western side that are not protected at this point.
And are they developed?
No.
Okay,
There's some priority properties in there too.
okay. Okay, great.
I think through our easements alone, we've protected around 200 acres, not just under that collectively. And that's all
And the
out.
closest to
Yeah.
the intake too, which is
Yep.
is priorities.
Yep. Not including the Dover's, potential easement and locking that in, so.
We're in a good place now that we've done this. We can only have the bandwidth to do so many at a time. Now we have the freedom to now reach out to those landowners and pursue more.
And are there still funds, as far as you know, too, to help offset the cost, so it doesn't all come from the city?
Yep, Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund is excellent.
Okay.
It's helped us a lot. So
That's great. Yeah, it'd be great. Maybe at the next meeting, we can look at a map of what's protected and what's left to
Yep.
be protected. So, okay. Wonderful. All right. So Representative David Muse couldn't be here tonight. Unfortunately, he had a conflict with another board that he's on. So he did create a summary of water bills that I did email out to all of you, and we'll make sure that that's included in our minutes. And he really just said in terms of a summary for the bottom line on current legislation in New Hampshire, there's no progress on lead poisoning, some progress on landfill siting and regulations is possible, but a Senate amendment to the budget could upend any progress and no additional progress on PFAS regulation. And then he included just this chart or, bullets on how to interpret the spreadsheet that he sent out in terms of the status of each bill. And I did look at a few of the bills that I think would be, that would pertain to things that we've talked about here. So HB 691 was prohibiting adding fluoride to public water systems, and it's currently inexpedient to legislate. HB 756 establishing blood level testing for kids in daycares and public schools, that was also deemed inexpedient to legislate. And then there was SB 115, make an appropriations for regional drinking water infrastructure, that was tabled. And SB 240, make an appropriation to DES for eligible water projects, and that was tabled. So those are the ones, there was a lot of other ones listed in there on landfills and different types of wastes, but those were the water ones that I could pull out. So I think if we have any questions, we can direct them to David. I don't have a lot of in-depth knowledge on these bills, but I just wanted to make sure that we shared his spreadsheet and kind of gave his high level talking points on that. So are there any high level questions that maybe I can answer? Okay, all right, then we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, our mission discussion. So this is something we've been talking about probably for about a year now as a group. And I think we're getting close to a point where we're ready to kind of finalize, potentially recommending a change in our mission to the city council. And so first, I just want to recognize what our current mission is, which was established back in 2020 when this group was first forming, which was to review and communicate the latest science on the health and environmental effects of PFAS, to monitor federal and state legislative changes, and to anticipate policy changes that could impact the city of Portsmouth. And so we certainly do that in this group without a doubt. There's not a single meeting where we don't talk about PFAS, and I don't think there's a single meeting where we talk about PFAS and there hasn't been some type of change that we're trying to figure out how it's going to impact the city or impact agencies that we work with. So it's very great that we have this group and we have this mission, and we certainly are meeting this mission, but also through the work that we've done in the last 5 years, we've certainly expanded to talk about other things related to drinking water. And we have talked as a group about what it makes sense to try to expand our mission to be a bit more consistent with the topics that we're talking about. And so we've gone through a few different iterations as a group and talked about how we could modify our existing mission to be a bit more robust. And so I tried to use colors to help you all recognize, what's in white is the current mission, and then what's in yellow is what we have suggested adding, and then green is just a couple other suggestions that have come in from the SWAG. And so it would be my hope that if everyone agrees with our proposed mission, that at our next meeting in the fall, we could take a vote to say, yes, we as a group agree that this should be our new mission. And then in terms of, we've talked about how do we go about getting our mission changed? And there's really 2 ways that we can do that. One is that we can make that recommendation to the city council, and it can be brought forth at a city council meeting and it can be voted on. And where we're not even going to vote on this until the fall, recognizing that we're coming up against a city council that will be ending at the end of this year. Another thing that we could do is also when this group will end at the end of this council's term, and it has to be approved to start back up by the next council. When we give a readout to the council at the end of the year, we could make this recommendation at the end of the year, and then when the new council comes in next year, they can, if they agree to reinstate the swag, they can reinstate it with an updated mission. So I think from a timing perspective, the latter sounds probably like the best thing to do, just to give us all time to, not all of our members are here, but to digest this proposed mission, if there's any changes we want to discuss, and then take a vote in the fall. And then by the end of the year, make this recommendation in our document that goes to the city council, and then the next council could vote potentially on that. So with that, I'll just read what the proposed mission is, and then I'll open it up if anyone has any questions or feedback. So it would be to review and communicate the latest science on the health and environmental effects of PFAS, to monitor federal and state legislative changes, and to anticipate policy changes that could impact the city of Portsmouth, to discuss topics relevant to the city's drinking water, quantity, quality, preservation, and conservation efforts, and water infrastructure projects, to discuss public health aspects of water quality support and provide public education about drinking water topics, and take proactive stances to protect and conserve water quality and quantity. And so I think under this proposed mission, we've already done a lot of that in terms of, we've talked about, you know, other topics beyond PFAS like lead and fluoride, and we've talked about climate change impacts, cybersecurity. We've talked about water conservation, you know, conserving our water, protecting our water. So we've covered a lot of these topics, and it would be great to have our mission just be more consistent with the things that we're already doing and how we've evolved as a group. So does anyone have any thoughts or feedback or things that you would on the mission, the proposed mission itself, or the plan to, you know, put it in our end of year summary to the city council with a recommendation?
I think it's good. I mean, it really says what has been happening.
Mhm.
It's not, so I kind of assume that's what it is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, for some context, when this group was formed in 2020,
It was PFAS.
it was PFAS, and it was like, we need a way to formally be able to talk about PFAS, you know,
That's your fault.
yeah. But our group has evolved. Like, I feel like we've grown to talk more about PFAS, and, you know, there's a lot going on in our city related to drinking water. That's not just, I mean, PFAS is a big part of it, but there's a lot of other things going on too. And it's been very enlightening to be a part of this group and understand all of the work that Al does, Mason and their group. It's been an incredible thing to see, and I'm so glad. It was great to hear Dover say, like, we don't have something like this, you know. I think we're providing a value to the community, and even though we don't get a lot of people that show up, but having this information out there publicly available, you know, water is so critically important to all of us as humans. So I think it's just great that we have this group and that we have evolved beyond just PFAS.
This isn't about the mission, but I'm just curious, have you guys or you presented, you know, the swag at any meetings or conferences to tell other municipalities what you've done and how it's served the community?
No. No, maybe next year.
Get back, let's speak into her.
DES just had a source water protection conference last week. This could probably be a good discussion at a conference like that. I think they do it every year though, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
Part of the community outreach and how we've done it.
yeah,
Be a good presentation.
yeah. So we could.
I just, you know, I don't see any problem with moving forward with this. I don't know, Rich, if
I
you,
agree. I think the final edit is great. I think it includes all the different aspects, you know, that pertain to the clean drinking water and protecting clean drinking water and ensuring that future Portsmouth has.
I mean, I would vote on it, you know, next council meeting.
Okay, yeah, I think, I don't, so we've talked about this for about a year, but at some meetings, we don't have a lot of members, so I don't wanna rush this process or anyone feel like, you know,
Yeah,
we've
let's-
changed anything and they haven't had a chance to weigh in, so so I think what Al and I were discussing was, you know, we can send this out in an email, and that's the other thing too, we can't communicate, you can't have discussions over email, you know, we need to do it in a public way too, so you know, I'm happy to send this out to the group and say, you know, the plan is to vote on this at the next meeting, which would be until the fall. And then at that point, you know, so likely September is our next meeting at some point. And then would it make sense then to have you bring it to the council in the fall, or should we wait till the end of year summary? I was just thinking of timing wise. I know the end of the year for the council is also a busy time, so I would defer to you too, if you think we should bring it, you know, once we vote as a swag in the fall, should we just have you bring it up to the council? Or should we wait and have it just be part of the?
Yeah,
Yes, I'm wondering about what the legal process is to change emission you know, and
My understanding, if
is
it's,
this in an ordinance?
if it's my understanding is if it's a reappointment, that's the appropriate time to adjust the mission because it will be a reappointment with this mission.
Yeah.
If we tried to change the mission in the middle of that term, it would have to go through some other review.
Okay,
So I think it's better to do it like this process. During the report to council, that's the perfect time to introduce this is what we're.
Yeah, historically, what we've done at the end of our 2 years is we write up a summary. It's been Brian and I, it'll be Al and I. We've had all these meetings, these are the topics, and these are the things as a swag we recommend to the city council. So in that report, we could recommend it. And we always recommend, please reinstate the swag, you know, because we want this group to continue. So that was our thought, is we could do that at the end of the year. And then when the new council comes in, hopefully they'll reinstate us with the revised mission. If you all think that makes the most sense, okay.
I think that makes the most sense, as El said, and then you're not wasting a bunch of like staff time and meetings and stuff just to, you know what I mean? Do
Yes,
some red
yeah.
tape that, yeah, could be done a lot easier.
And the reality is, we're already talking about these things anyways,
Yes,
you know,
right.
so it's not
Not
like this is
affecting
gonna hold us back in any way. It's
Yeah.
just gonna, I think, be more in line with what we're already doing, so. Okay, great. So yeah, I'll send that out, and any other thoughts or feedback? You
I
can-
think it's a great idea for you to go public with this, you know?
Yeah, spread the model.
Spread the model. yeah.
Yeah. Great. So now is our time for public comment, and do we have anyone online? Okay. We don't have anyone in the audience, our folks already left, so any final questions or thoughts from anyone?
Last minute thoughts of topics that you'd like to have covered in the future?
Yeah, thank you to
Like
Kadri, she suggested the cybersecurity, so we had that tonight.
I think that's the only concern from our end from time to time, it's just running out of topics.
I know, but we never do. Like
Yeah.
Al and I will meet talking about the agenda, and we have so many, and we're like, whoa, we're already at 10 things, like,
Yeah.
just, and we never seem to run out, so,
Nice to pull other people in and hear from
yeah.
us too, I think
Yeah.
that's huge. Reaching a wider audience, I know the way that they're posted on the YouTube channel is just the date and Safe Water Advisory Group meeting. Maybe doing some sort of hyphen or dash and kind of including the topics that we're talking about,
Okay,
just so when people see that as a header, they can, you know, if they wanna chime into a conversation more relating to you know, regulatory updates or fluoride or lead. You know, that's something that they can see firsthand right off the bat, click on it.
yeah,
I think otherwise, you know, we do push for this, you know, in all of our consumer confidence reports that are being sent out actually next week. You know, by 8,000 plus people, the swag is included in those CCRs, and we do advocate for that. Put it on the city website, it is pushed in several places, but I've noticed the views are minimal. So, and I think there might be a reason for that, and I think it's just the headers. You know, we live in a, yeah,
is that, Stephanie, is that your team
yeah,
that?
it's
puts that-
shown
Okay,
over time.
There's not a whole lot we can do, but I'll definitely check with Kevin, cause it's a small box.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that you had mentioned at the last meeting was when we have guest speakers, do some advanced publicity for those, cause we haven't done that. There's no reason not to do that. So certainly if you're gonna do a map of what the current status of protection around the Bellamy is, we can promote that in advance so people can tune in and watch it.
okay.
Or, you know, what is swag anyway? So.
All right, something for us to think about, maybe something. Like just a topic is how can we make what we do more publicly known, I guess, and make our materials more known and our topics and meetings, so, okay.
I know when people ask me, what committees are you on? I say, well, I'm on SWAG. What? What is that? And then it gives me a chance to explain it.
Yeah.
And I say it's pretty technical. So it's interesting. And most people say, wow, well, that is interesting. So I don't know.
Marketing's a tough thing.
Yeah, well, I wonder,
Swag for swag.
Yeah.
are there any fairs, like I know in the past Brian's gone to stuff like the Earth Day stuff?
Yes.
Maybe we can think about different events where environmental stuff and we can have a table. Yeah, you know, I know the farmer's market.
Yeah, you'll see the farmer's market always, city manager always has a booth.
Yeah, it has a booth
Yeah.
at the farmer's market.
Yeah. And then she's been looking
That'd
for
be
more
good.
ways to like reach out to public in the winter time and stuff, but.
Okay.
We do need some swag, we need some cards.
Yeah.
I know, right,
Swag.
swag for the swag, okay. All right, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Been finished a few minutes early, so.
Thank you, Adrian.
Have a beautiful night and a good summer,
Yes.
guys in the fall.
My friend Rich said,
And
Rich's son was on.
Oh, James, yes. He's doing well.
Is he all right?
He's okay. He's got,
Is he injured?
yes, he has 2 broken wrists and a broken elbow. So he's in 2 casts. He's had 2 surgeries. Puncture